and welcome to everyone. I'm really happy that we have our fourth conversation around living in claustrophilia. That's a cycle that has somehow come about or been conceptualized in the wake of COVID, as you can imagine. And so claustrophilia, what is that? It's not claustrophobia, but it's claustrophilia, so liking small spaces. Or the idea was to think, what can small spaces contribute? How can they be lived in a positive way? What is maybe special about small spaces? So this cycle has been thought about by Annalisa Viati, who is an architect and researcher, and is also our partner institution at the École d'Architecture in Versailles, who cannot be here unfortunately tonight, but she is really somehow the brain behind this project. And we had different encounters. One was about space shuttles, for example, and then an encounter with a philosopher. Then last time we met here, it was about hospitals, so also confined spaces where you're maybe not going on your free will. Also with an artist, Benoît Piron. And tonight, the topic is tiny architecture between play, game and survival. And I'm really happy to welcome our guests. So we have an architecture duo, Nickisch Walder from Switzerland. They both, so Selina Walder and Georg Nickisch, studied both in Mendrisio, where there's a very well-known school of architecture, and they joined in 2005 to form the duo Nickisch Walder. And their constructions are interested in presences, tectonic presences. That's what I found on your website, so I'm really curious to hear what that means. And there are two projects I think you will focus about. Three? Very nice. Where there are really tiny spaces that they have built. And then I'm also welcoming Olivia Funes Lastra, who is an artist, and she is also resident here at the Cité des Arts. Olivia has studied at the École Nationale Supérieure in Cergy and also at the Universidad Torquato d'Italia. And her work is a transdisciplinary practice between installation, performance, text as well. And I'm looking forward to discover her practice more, and she's also present at the Biennale de Lyon at the moment. I will hand over to Georg and Selina, and then afterwards we will delve into Olivia's practice, and obviously the idea is also that there is a conversation between our guests and also with you. So if questions come up, please remember them and don't hesitate to bring them in at the end.
Thank you very much. I would like to show you three projects tonight, which I hope that they're going to contribute to the theme. These are three build projects from our project, from our office. The first one is the refuge, which is a project that we built. That was one of our first projects that we ever built, and it's situated in the community of Flims. As you can see, this is kind of in the middle of the Swiss mountains. The village is towards the north, and there's this extensive forest to the south, and the site where this cabin is sitting is just at the edge of the forest, in between forest and the village. The client that came to us, he bought this shed, really. It's an agricultural structure that's been used to, where the person that watched after the cows, he stayed there and he slept there. And the client, he wanted to turn this into a structure, into a habitable structure that could be rented out to tourists. And I guess he also wanted to have something a little bit more comfortable. Inside the cabin, we found that boulder rocks that are reminiscent of a huge landslide that happened around 10,000 years ago. And that's kind of one of our first inspirations. And maybe just to explain you quickly, we were confronted with this building restrictions, with the building law, and so we could not extend the cabin to the outside. We could just extend it to the underground, and by law we could kind of extend it by around 30%. So by kind of insetting the walls by the insulation or by the kind of building structure, we were able to build another floor underground. So our first kind of idea was to make these two distinct spaces from one another. One for living, which would be above the ground, kind of related to the forest floor, and one underground for the sleeping, which would be related to the underground of the forest, like these boulders in the root of the forest. The second kind of restriction that we had to face was that by law we would have to keep the character of this cabin. And then we were thinking, like, what does it mean to keep the character? On one hand, this, as you know, on the first image you could see, this is a very shady, damp place, and the logs of this cabin, they were like falling apart and they were rotten. So we didn't think that this would be a good place to build a wooden structure. And also we did not want to just kind of imitate a timber log cabin, and we didn't want to destroy that kind of, let's say, cultural heritage of that cabin just by putting like a holiday apartment inside. So Selina had that idea, what's happening if we use the old cabin as a formwork for the new one? And so using the wood and kind of pouring the concrete inside for the new cabin. And so this is a diagram where you can see the green that's the old structure, and the black, that would be the new building. And we couldn't really imagine how it would look like, and we tried to make models to get kind of an idea how if this would be technically even possible. And from smaller models we went to bigger models, trying to find out is this technically possible, and how could this be done? How does a thing like this even looks like? And then we went to the real construction site. So we only had one try. If that failed, then we would have to think about plan B. And so the construction site went up, and all these kind of spaces in between, we would have to somehow make them watertight so we could fill the structure with concrete. This is already the formwork going out, and this is how it came out. So it's like an imprint of the old cabin. You can still read it, but it's an entirely new structure. The space, the cabin itself, doesn't have more than maybe 42, 43 square meters, so that upper space where you come in has around just approximately 20 square meters. This is the living space. It has a small kitchen and has a small place to eat. And the entire back wall is dedicated for a fireplace. So the entire structure is a monolithic structure, floor, walls and ceiling. This is all made out of one material. We even try to make the floor similar to the wall, so you really feel like inside that monolithic material. Everything else, like kitchen or some doors or this window, for example, they're made out of wood, and they're placed inside the cabin like objects. So this window sits there like a picture frame on top of the concrete. And you go through a very narrow staircase down into the underground, and there you come to that sleeping room. I don't know if you are used to read plans. You can see a little bit kind of the bathroom is, the toilet is just reduced to an absolute minimum. Also the space there is not very large. We even had to put the wardrobe inside the wall. And then next to the window, to the top, there's the bath that we kind of had to almost put into the sleeping room because there wasn't any space. But it kind of leads to the situation where you would kind of be in the underground of a forest next to these boulders. And so all these intimate functions there in the underground and the more living-related functions there in the overground. The door, the window is also made like a door, and that was important to us so that you don't get caught there in the underground. So you wouldn't get this unpleasant feeling of being trapped. So you could also leave the underground space to the outside, and you can also, so you can access and leave and access both spaces, and you never feel trapped inside. The legal reason behind it is so we could also make the staircase just about 70 centimeters. So you could almost squeeze through that staircase down. Legally, that's not allowed in Switzerland, but because this would be our emergency exit, we could do it. This is the next project. Around 10 years ago, the community of Zermatt, they celebrated their 150th anniversary of the first ascent of the Matterhorn. And for that, they had to refurbish the Hörnli hut. This is kind of there. And this is a mountain cabin from where you would climb on top of that mountain. And during that, for that anniversary, they wanted to kind of refurbish it and kind of have it fresh and new. And they were asking us to make kind of a temporary substitute structure that would serve for 1 year as this Hörnli hut. And the next bit, this is the Hörnli hut, and a little bit further down, we found a suitable space for this temporary structure. This is that place looking from the other side, and it's kind of a large field of gravel, of loose gravel material, but it would be the only place which would be shallow enough that you could actually kind of place a structure. Maybe just quickly, one of the first things we ask the community of Zermatt is, okay, why wouldn't you just buy a couple of tents and place them there and rent those out? Wouldn't that be much lighter, much cheaper? And they said, no, the problem is the weather up there is so grim that they would have to replace these tents like every couple of days, and on the long run it would be so much more, because everything there you have to bring up by helicopter. And it's not about the tent itself, it's about kind of, if you have to fly like 20 times up and down to bring these tents, then it just doesn't calculate anymore. So we started, it's the web, anyways, so we started to design these tents. And the first thing that we came up with is this kind of triangular structure that looks actually a little bit like a tent. And this is, for us, this would be the most archaic shape for shelter, for having a roof above your head to be protected from nature. Secondly, it's really the most stable shape that we can think of to distribute the forces that kind of the wind load is on these tents into the ground. The ground is unstable, it's not like a rock face where you can just screw it in. And the third is that we just really like this prismatic geometric shapes that would be in this stark contrast to the nature around. The material we chose for these tents, for these shelters, was an untreated aluminium, so kind of a shiny aluminium that would reflect the colors of the sky and of the nature around. inside these shelters were kind of, they had like a linen tent inside that got kind of manufactured by a Swiss tent maker, and the floor would just be wood. We designed 4 different modules, 4 different shelters, and they are based on a module that we could just kind of repeat or kind of extend to however that big that unit would be. This is the smallest one, just for sleeping in. All the tents and all the shelters, they had a little window which would just be a glass fiber plate that would just let in the light. So when you're inside, you still get an idea, is it day or is it night? Or I don't know, has my shelter been covered by snow overnight? And that's kind of looking outside. These kind of structures were full of small details that we just learned through talking to the people working there when we were planning. So for example, that kink inside is so when it snows, like I don't know, 2 meters snow at night, when the triangular door would be flat at the bottom, you couldn't open it anymore. So with that kink, it would allow you to kind of push out the door into the snow easier. Then the next structure, that was it's like a meeting tent or an eating tent for the climbers. So before they climb up the mountain, they would kind of meet there and eat. There was a kitchen tent. That one didn't have any lining inside. During the time, you could also just go up there and eat there in a restaurant. And the last structure is a storage and a kind of a bathroom that would just kind of provide the bare minimum of what you have there. I mean, they didn't really wanted people to use it because the water up there is so precious that they just kind of, so you just were allowed to brush your teeth, wash your face, and that's it really. So the structures, they were screwed into the ground by these large screws, and like this you could level the structures even, and it gave them a little bit this appearance of like if they would float over the ground. Also, this had this effect, the aluminium and these kind of screw anchors into the ground, they work as a Faraday cage. So in terms of like of lightning that would distribute the electricity into the ground. This was also something that we just didn't think of first. We were kind of trying to distribute them a little bit loosely. I had to do it. We had to do it ourselves because the mountain guides helping us to do it, they just kind of placed everything in a straight line. And I said, okay, wait, maybe this can also look a bit different. And so the image that this created, we kind of had from the beginning. We always liked this image of almost like a flock of animals that just stopped by and they would just kind of rest there temporarily on this mountain, almost like a family of different objects. And the last project I would like to show is a house, also in Flims again. The client came to us and she asked us if we could build her a new house instead of an old one. This again, we had quite a long discussion with her because we were saying, okay, I mean, it's a nice idea, but isn't it possible maybe to make something out of the old house? I mean, should you just really throw away your old house? We had so we were first trying to work out something with this house, and then only when we found out that it wouldn't really work on many levels, she gave us green light to build a new structure. As you can see, the house is set, we would say it's like a second it's like a second row position, so it's not at the street. It's a house that stands in a kind of garden situation. So from the beginning, we would like to think about this as a almost as a pavilion type of house, and surrounded by this garden. One thing that we had to deal with from the beginning is this lighter square that's a different lot, and so eventually someone comes and he's going to build a house there as well. So we had to provide a street running through, accessing this lot. And so we were planning this street and kind of parking lot from the beginning, and dividing it with a wall from the garden space. The house is really layered in 3 spaces that have a very distinct character from one another. The first one would be an apartment on the garden level, really having this strong relation to the garden and around and to the ground. The next would be a layer with only sleeping rooms that would be really intimate and introverted. And the third layer, the top layer, is again an apartment that we would like to work almost as a platform or as a terrace that kind of looks over the garden into the landscape and into the village around. These kind of these layered spaces, in order to give them their character, we did a couple of things. So, for example, this layer with the sleeping rooms, we really try to squeeze together as much as possible. I mean, we reduced it to the legal minimum. So the 2 apartments on the garden level and on the top level would be as high and spacious as possible. There's a staircase running, connecting the lower apartment with the upper apartment. And that kind of makes this almost corridor-like tunnel running diagonally through the house. And that gave us the opportunity. I mean, this is what the clients really asked for. They wanted to have a multi-generational house. They had a very unclear situation with the family where they couldn't say, do we want to rent the house out, and how many kids are our kids going to be making, and how is this in 5 years? We have no idea. So they just wanted to have the house in the most diverse working way possible. And with this diagonal staircase connecting these 2 spaces, we could think of many different ways. So the whole house could be used, or depending on whether you close the upper door or the lower door, you could just rent it out at the top or at the bottom. How it's normally used is that whoever comes would take the lower or the upper floor, and then the yellow floor in the middle, just containing the sleeping room. Depending with how many people you come, you just take extra sleeping rooms from this level. The structure, because the house, I mean, I don't know, for Swiss standards, the house is kind of small, and they were asking for a lot of program. So we had a little bit of a problem to getting all of this program in. And one way of dealing with this is the concrete that we built the house with really helped us. Everything which is carrying, everything with the structure is concrete. And everything else is lightweight, so wood or glass. And the concrete containing space is also doing the structure at the same time. So this would be a diagram, a simple diagram of the structure of this building. So the diagonal staircase, or this triangular column, is containing all the pipes and the electricity running up and down, and this other column, that's the chimney. And they kind of make the core structure of the house. And these structures they also make the space inside the house. I mean, they're not hidden or they're not kind of covered by walls. They just go through and they also kind of define the space inside this building. So wherever you are, you can read these elements, these sculptural elements. It's like space defining. When you come into the house, so this is the floor plan of the garden apartment, and you can see actually quite well how these structures, they are spaced spatially, and everything in between is just a lightweight structure. So you come in, and then there's a living space with the kitchen. Up there's a niche with the sleeping room. There's also a small bathroom, so it's an entirely autonomous working apartment. The section of this space is done in a way that it's almost like sunken a little bit into the garden. And the window is placed outside, so it disappears behind the concrete. From the outside, you can see it a little bit, how this kind of seating bench is, it's almost like, so you're sitting almost in the garden, and the relation of this floor with the garden outside. From the inside, and again, you can see these structural elements that kind of hold up the house on one hand, at the same time it's almost also making the spaces. Then one floor up, this is this the level with these intimate sleeping rooms. So each of these sleeping rooms just kind of being the bare minimum, what you need to get inside the space, and then just into the bed. And there the section works that the bed is kind of really against the window, and I don't know if you can read it. There is this wooden shutter that you can higher or lower, up and down, to kind of regulate the intimacy of that space by letting in less or more light into the space. Also, I think we really always like this idea of kind of having a bed just next to the window, and so at night you could just open one of these windows and just kind of like almost sleep inside this garden. And these clients, they are sane people. I mean, they used to say their entire life, and it was actually something that really helped us because they always loved the idea of having this kind of very kind of cozy sleeping rooms, and they also like the idea of having these wooden shutters, this string. This is something they came up with because we were starting to invent like electrical motors to lower these things up and down. And I said, no, let's just kind of make it with these strings. So each person sleeping in there can control the amount of light coming into the sleeping room itself. And the idea would really be to have almost like with one of these caps, you can kind of control the amount of views coming in, and each ray of light that should kind of enter the sleeping room should be reflected by a plant or a leaf from the garden. So it's all indirect light that comes into these rooms. It also has this effect that the more people inside, the more this kind of building opens up a little bit. And then when kind of no one is there, kind of, the middle floor is entirely closed. The top floor is again this kind of autonomous apartment that works as this terrace. Here the section is done in a way that the floor is kind of acting as a platform, the window kind of disappearing behind. It's making it so it's almost like you're standing on a platform in that landscape, and then there's the roof sitting on top, giving you this protection from above. So you can see it a little bit here, that there's kind of balconies where you can step out. And in the background you can see a little bit that you start to look over the plants of the garden into the distance. kind of into this mountain landscape. Thank you very much.
I just quickly, say a few words why we chose these three projects, because I think within this theme claustrophobia they show three aspects that I find interesting. The first one is the typical refuge, where somebody maybe tries to escape an overstimulated world and find just the elemental things that you need. You have these two spaces, in one you live, in the other you sleep. In the upper floor you have the fire, downstairs you have the water. You just have you live a life a little bit like a monk and get rid of everything which is superfluous. Well, the third one gives, I think here the common floors, they're quite generous in order to gather the family, and this space is, I think, very important to the house in order that the people from the family can get a space where they are alone, where they can decide by themselves how much. It's about extroversion and introversion, and have a space to be alone in a social community. And in this project, I think it's about the protection aspect, that you're exposed to so much nature, to this vast, almost endless space, and it's important that you find a place where you are protected, where it is small. You even don't have any window because you're exposed to the nature the whole day, so that you can find yourself in different situations.
So I really started, when preparing for this presentation, I was thinking a lot about my relationship to architecture in general. And so I remembered about this work that I did when I was in art school, where my friend and artist Constance de Vaucourt and we gave ourselves the mission to create our own sheds. And so what I did from my side was to reconstruct all the rooms that I had lived in up until that point. And so this was in 2016. And all of these rooms were piled up to create the same structure. So it became a kind of mental architecture of all of these very intimate places. And the only other architectural element that was reconstructed also was the windows. And on all of these windows, there was a small kind of anecdote or vignette that came from this space. And they were all constructed using pieces of cardboard and tape, so it has also this very fragile characteristic. And all of these vignettes really came from this kind of subjective and intimate experience between being in the inside and the outside, coming in or trying to establish a kind of relationship with it. And so in this one, it says, La lumière des gratte-ciel rentre dans notre chambre. Avec mes binoculaires, je peux espionner les familles qui habitent en face. So it says, the light from the skyscrapers come into our room. With my binoculars, I can spy the families that live in front of us. And so all of these rooms obviously came from different moments of my life, either childhood, adolescence, or young adulthood. And for me, this was a very important piece because I really began to ask myself this question, which was, how do the places that we inhabit continue to inhabit us after we have left them? And what shape they take in our minds and in our memories. Also, I became really obsessed with the gesture of bringing together all of these spaces, trying to compose all of these spaces. And so I started to collect a series of photographs of the places that were part of my past, but also from my present. So these are more photographs, and I always say that there is a part of my family which has been very much rooted in Buenos Aires, where I'm originally from, and then the other half of my family that left. And I am part of those who have left, and hence I am quite fascinated by the part of my family that has stayed, and not only stayed, but has really been rooted in the city of Buenos Aires, and who were urban planners, who were architects, and so they were building in the city, and so I also started to photograph these buildings as a way to maybe root myself back to this place. And so these archive of images that I showed before, they became for me a tool for painting. So I would pick, for example, a detail, a color, some kind of motif that was present in these photographs, and I would imprint them on fabric. And so these archive of images became a tool for painting, but maybe actually painting was a tool for remembering these places, right? And so I used textile because of its nomadic quality. Textile has this capacity of inhabiting the architectural scale, but also the scale of mobility. You can fold it, you can put it in a suitcase, and then you can deploy it in space and create walls with it. And another aspect that also became really important in this process was color. And color became for me like a way of keeping these places alive, and it became the reminiscence of all of these places. And for me, color has always been something also that was at the limit of language. At least in the languages that I know, color has names, but words can have a hard time defining color. And this tool that at the same time I felt was dialoguing with language but escaping it really interested me. And so with color and textile, I started creating these paintings that would unfold in space, but would also create a kind of landscape that bodies can move through like a landscape. And so we're simultaneously in the inside and in the outside, right, of this space. And so I like thinking of these textile paintings as fragments that come together and are arranged and rearranged according to the places that they are anchoring themselves in. And in this installation in particular, that what I find that I tried to do was to have these this double nature or gesture or way of inhabiting this space. The textile paintings are this nomadic, mobile painting and color, and that are hung here and are are in transition. And they're being welcomed by this wall painting that in a way continues what's on the fabric, but goes on to the scale of the architecture. So it welcomes these paintings, and once the paintings leave, the walls also become the memory of the passage of these mobile paintings in this space. And so I also really love this double movement of welcoming and being welcomed constantly and simultaneously. And so my paintings continued to travel from place to place, and I like to think that they not only inhabit places, but they're also being inhabited by the places that they're operating in, and the places that they go on to inhabit are operating within them. So they're constantly being transformed, and I also like to think that they continue to accumulate memories of the spaces that they go through. I also started to become more and more interested with the idea of language also as an architecture that is also mobile and in movement. Here in these images, just to contextualize, it's an installation that was made in dialogue with an architecture of Tadawando. And so the paintings that you see here are actually the same ones that are being lined up, and in a way they follow the drawing that was originally made by Tadawando in this space. And so quite naturally I began to activate the installations with texts that I was writing, using a lot also translation as a gesture and as a movement between languages. And I mentioned color before as this element that is at the limit of language, and I always say, kind of joking, but it's actually true, that my dream was always to become a writer, but that because I never felt like I had one clear mother tongue very much defined, I never felt legitimate to write, because the phrases would be a kind of patchwork of different languages. And so I decided to kind of use this hybrid language to start writing, and this hybrid language was also a way for me to try and keep the memories of these places alive, no? And also infusing the installation with playing also with the limit of language. Language is something that is trying to define a memory, but the memory escapes it also. My texts in the installations can take different forms. They can be like theater scripts. They can be kind of like choreographical scripts where we can see the movement that I would do whilst reading the text. They can also become like, I also draw them with different colors, so it kind of looks, at least for me, like a kind of musical partition. And sometimes also the installations becomes like a scene that welcomes the reading, and so the elements become activated. They're also in movement, and they're being infused with this hybrid language. This is a script, a text that I wrote following this fascination with this half of my family that has been so rooted in Buenos Aires, where I'm from, and who have built these buildings that are very much inspired by these rationalist and modernist currents that were here in Europe. And so I started comparing this kind of modernist architecture with the structure of language. And so I will just read the translation of this script. They used letters as a modern and abstract way of containing bodies, classifying memories, naming the different sides of each wall they constructed. She told me this story many times. I was the soft body and the linear architecture all at once, or the contrary. I am that modern alphabet that believes can contain it all. I still don't know if I'm the wall or the rectangle that gave it a shape. I am the wall that divides and the rectangle's shadows that erases it all. I am that architecture from the inside that invented its own geometry without a name. I still don't know. I tend to confuse the two sides of the same wall. And last year, following with language as a thread, I had the chance to do a year-long residency in Madrid, following onto the steps of Maria Zambrano, which is a Spanish philosopher who lived 40 years of exile between Europe and Latin America. And in all of these 40 years of exile, language for Maria Zambrano, and in particular the Spanish language, became a sort of refuge. And she developed during this time what she called it the poetic reason. So poetry as an anchor onto the world and as a way of inhabiting it. And for me, last year was also a very particular time because I came back to inhabit the Spanish language again after 10 years of having left it behind, of being here in France. And something quite strange happened that was quite unexpected also, is that writing and words burst directly into my paintings as another pictorial element with which to work with. And so I would write and paint simultaneously, like there was this very porous dialogue between the two practices that up until that point had been quite separate, even though they wanted to meet in the middle. And I was invited to be part of this year's Lyon Biennale, whose themes were that of hospitality, the relationship to the environment. And I discovered a text by Jacques Derrida et Anne de Furmantel, which in French is called De l'Hospitalité. And in this beautiful, after the reading of this beautiful text, I started thinking of this idea of language as a space, as a welcoming space, as a space that we bring along with us, a space that is also constantly in movement. In a language, there are also many other languages. It's also a space of memories. It's also a very intimate space. In Spanish and in French, la langue, the tongue, is at the same time the language, but also the organ that is in our bodies, right? So there's this very intimate relationship. And so I wanted to create this space, which is also quite intimate, and also thinking of the paintings as a kind of hybrid tongue, a hybrid also sort of language. And in the room, in the space of the Grand Locaux of the Biennale, there was this space that I loved a lot because there was this wall painting that for me made me think of landscape, of a horizon line. And I always, with all of these reflections of language as this hybrid identity, I started thinking of this analogy with the river. And so I wanted my paintings to become a sort of river that fall onto the sea, which is this wall painting. And so the paintings are in the horizontal axis, they're above the ceiling, and then they fall to create walls and circulations within the space. And the archive at the end of the room, here, there is a projection in which the archive images that I showed in the beginning, I arranged them with the common theme of the horizon line. And so I composed all of these images so that they would fall, they would be at the same level as the line of the wall painting in the room. And it was a video where in each horizon line there was a phrase in a different language, so it became like a poem that scrolled in the space. And all of these writings were being washed away by the water, so at the same time we could read certain words, but also the words became images. I then activated the installation with a multilingual reading group that is a group that gathers to keep certain languages alive. And these languages are either part of their own personal stories or that of their families. And so I have a small fragment of this activation that took place last month. So at the end of the space, there was these small little elements that were hung up, we couldn't have access to the space, so it became like a map of the installation that was adjacent to it. So all of these elements actually come from my models that I work with. And so these models are in the studio, and they're really a tool for me to understand with which gesture I will dialogue with this space. But I always became very sad because this tool that at the same time was a preparatory time before going into the space, after the installation was made, I had to destroy it in a way because I didn't have the space to store it anywhere. And I discovered this amazing work at the Museo Reina Sofia, which unfortunately it's I don't know who's the architect who did this because I can't find it in my archive. But I was so fascinated with this idea of doing a maquette, a model that would fit inside a box. And I thought, this is exactly what I need for my models. And so I started making these very tiny little models that can go into une boîte d'allumettes. So they can be exactly compressed, and then you can just put it in your pocket, and then you continue your life, you know. And so suddenly this space was this kind of pocket-sized object. And just to finish, I wanted to read a phrase by Ethel Adnan, someone who really helped me also in all of the process. And she says, Je me souviens avoir dit quelque part que mes livres, poésie ou prose, étaient, sont, les maisons que j'habite. C'est vrai, et cela paraît simple. Or, ce ne l'est pas. Même là, les ports n'est pas à l'abri des tempêtes. And in English it translates to, I have it here. I remember saying somewhere that my books, poetry or prose, where are the houses I live in. It is true, and it seems simple, yet it is not. Even there, the harbor is not sheltered from storms. And I guess for me, I could replace the word books by the word paintings and say that the paintings are, in a way, the houses that I live in. And it may seem simple, but it is not. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all of you. This is on. To give us an insight into both of your practices, and I think they are very diverse, and at the same there are so many links that we can take. I would like to start with you, Selina and Georg, thinking of these tents, where like really the image of confines the smallest unit of habitation. And then again, you had to build these, and now they have disappeared. So I was wondering what is left for you? What traces did it leave? Like maybe for your practice, what are your lessons learned? What has remained permanent in this project for you?
I think on one side it's the idea and the atmosphere that once it was built you could live. Unfortunately, we were never able to sleep in these tents because we were there at the inauguration, and afterwards we thought to come back. Our daughter was just born, and on this height it was not easy, and then it was a very bad summer with a lot of snow and very cold, so we didn't really make the experience. But you make up a story in your head, and this is what remains. and also the fantasy of what happened afterwards to the tents, because they were thought for this special place in the mountains, also with the material. What the idea was that it would reflect the colors of the surroundings of the materials that were around the rocks, but also the light and the atmosphere and the weather conditions. But then afterwards they would sell these tents. So there were several ideas what should happen to the tents. There were some ideas to make a pop-up hotels at the airport, or that they would go to the Biennale or the several places. So suddenly they started to relive in our heads with different colors, different situations, not in this remoteness of the mountains, but and I think this memory of existing tents together with what was possible, what might possibly happen to them, is what at least in my head.
Yeah, just last year I received a phone call from a shepherd, and he bought one of those, and he asked me whether they are lightning proof and how that works. And I explained him that he shouldn't be worried about. So they're still up and about somewhere.
Oh, excellent. So they have an afterlife.
Yes, they do.
And Olivia, so your somehow principle of working is to construct and dismantle and unfold your work again. And I was very interested to see in the first part of your presentation that for you the pictures that you take are somehow anchors. And I was interested if you're longing for more permanency, since your work is so nomadic and so based on the metamorphosis of every space. And how do you deal with this tension between nomadism and anchorage?
Yeah, so kind of like what I mentioned in the beginning about this family story of half of my family being rooted and anchored in a place and the other half leaving. For me, this is a tension that is always present, right? So something that is staying, but then will leave, maybe will return. And so this tension between these two apparent contrasting movements, I'm really interested in.
I was also wondering about the term of the topic of this cycle of the conference about claustrophilia. I was wondering if this is something that you have thought about, well, the three of you, or if it's something that you have somehow discovered with the invitation, or what did it like maybe bring as a new filter onto your own practice, if you think of it with this term.
What I found out now, also hearing Olivia, it's about the relationship. That you cannot look at the space isolated. It always depends what is outside. At a certain point, you were always saying, talking about the landscape, and that you're at the same time you're inside and you're outside. And I think in more precise architecture, where you have to define this, or in our projects especially, it was always a very clear decision where to put windows, where to communicate with the outside. And as I said, for example, also with the shelters, if the shelter would be in a very dense area, it would feel completely different. It would not have the protection aspect that it would have in this endless mountain thing where you almost need it. That, I think what is very interesting to me is always this relationship. Where it stands, what counterpart there is, but maybe also how to approach it, the steps that you go towards it. If there is just in or out, or if it's a sequence of spaces. In your work, I feel that everything melts or dissolves. You tend to avoid precise limits.
Yes, because I think kind of bouncing off what you just said, and then your question, Claire, is kind of how you live like an interior architecture, how you live it, right? And so in this subjective experience of it, the outside and the inside merge, no? Like this limit, which is physical, maybe disappears in a way.
Yeah, but even if it's cut off clearly, you know, when you're in this, this aluminium box, the outside still exists in your head. You know, even though you're kind of clearly cut off, and you know there's this vast kind of mountain scale outside, or when you're in kind of space shuttle, you know that there's the universe outside. I mean, this is kind of, and yes, and it's this. I think it's this relationship in between you and yeah.
And that architecture, in a way, divides but also fusions. So it helps us inhabit actually the landscape, right?
And it's always part of something. The same installation you do would feel completely different in two different spaces that make it.
I think it's also a question of scaling, right? I mean, if you are in a small space, then maybe you're protected, but you feel the vastness outside even more, and the other way around. And so also in your work, when you fold it up again, it fits maybe in a little bag or a big bag, but still it unfolds and it becomes so large, incredibly large, just with this lightness. I mean, it has a certain heaviness, I know, textile as well. And then you work with these little models, and then actually what you're talking about is about all these buildings of the memory. So somehow I have this, I don't know how to describe it, but for me it's like this movement that's going on all the time. So you're protected, you're somehow in a small confined space, but then it's opening up again. So I was wondering, how do you deal with the question of scaling, or the other way around? How does your bodily feeling maybe help you in defining how you work with the space?
Yeah, well, that makes me think of a lot of things.
Yeah, sorry.
but it's so interesting actually, because when I'm going back to the theme of the conference, like miniature yes, so like play, the notion of play. And so I like to play with scale. Scale is something that I like to play with in a way. And just for the small anecdote, because you were talking about COVID and confinement, actually the paintings of the first installation I showed here, I actually made them during COVID in my small little room, in my tiny little shower, and then it exploded in this space. So, and this is something I actually remembered when we were preparing for this presentation. And yes, this is something I like to play with. How can something be maybe produced or be moved in this tiny little space, and then can explode and create a whole different relationship to scale and to the architecture. And usually when I'm preparing for an installation, I like to spend time in the space, and I really do believe it does have to do with the scale of the body, everything. So yeah, the body is always very important.
When we do models, we always, at the end, we have to put an object. And, traditionally, it is this little white figure that you buy on Modulor, but you can also put a toilet or a chair or something that everyone knows how big it is, because without it you cannot. This gives the final scale to the space. You define how big it is by having a reference.
Yeah, your brain locks in and you immediately understand, okay, this is how the space is going to feel like. But I find this really interesting. So you also have to kind of visit the space. You have to kind of feel it, because this would have been a question of mine. But when do you know that the piece is the right scale or size? And it has to do with the experience of space. That has to do with your kind of own experience, with your relation of you and the space. That cannot be kind of where you can make a small model out of it, but it's just an imaginary representation of what you are imagining.
Yeah, and it's about the experience of the body and maybe also of movement, no? How you move between the spaces.
Totally.
I'm also thinking of the project Sultan and this sort of pavilion house, which is also like an expandable building or flat, and I found that very interesting, and I was wondering, how does it work in reality now? How is it lived by this family?
Actually, we have there were 2 apartments, and it is option to have either 1 or 2, and now of the 3 children I have, 2 of them have their own family. So what happened is that it works a little bit like the woman of the family has wished it would happen, because it's a holiday house, and she always said it's going to be for our family where we want to gather. That's why also we try to make big spaces where they have space to sit all together. And often what happens now is that the younger family, they live in one apartment, and the older family, they live in the other one. So the grandparents, and they eat either in their apartment or there. So that's where they gather, and then everyone has their own sleeping room. Or also the other from, how to say, not their own children, but then the other grandparents, sometimes they come. So they use it often in the extended family situation. And then, for example, Christmas, there is space for everyone to come. So then the whole house is then occupied.
Yeah, I mean, they really use it as this family gathering thing. So also like to bring friends and kind of like sleepovers and.
But at the same time, they also said they lived for about 2 years in the house, and then the client said now she's ready to rent it. Because he's an engineer, he always said the house before had an apartment to rent, we should have the option to rent it. She always said, oh no, if I have to rent it, I go to work more, so I can afford to not rent it. But now they lived both they don't rent it to everyone, but only to friends, but so both concepts are lived in.
So I'm looking to you, and I want to open the floor to our public. If you have questions to Selina, Georg, or Olivia, please. Yeah, Alex.
I do have a question first for Olivia, because I know, of course, that you're currently in a very specific context of the residency at the Cité, and so you are living and working in a singular contained space in the studio with its own constraints and architecture. So you, in the same room, you live, you work, you sleep, you paint, you write. And so because your work is so reactive and also to the general context and all the languages that traverse it, and they kind of function also as a refuge and a temporary space for you, I was wondering how maybe over the past few months your work has reacted to this situation.
Yes, I mean, it's so true that living and working in the same space, for me, when I started doing it, has been such a transformative experience. Because before I would, let's say, make a painting, leave, go back to my home, and come back. So there was this clear separation, right, between the studio and the living space. And I realized that I need to inhabit my paintings. Like, there's just something, to spend, the scale of time of living is not the same as working, right? And so, I love experiencing that scale of living in the place where you work, because it's like a sedimentation, right? And it's been really transformative for me, for sure.
Hi, so my name is Lani, I'm an architect
architect from Montreal, so from a French-speaking island in North America. And so we talked about the model making process for Olivia. But I was also curious to talk about it when it comes to your architecture practice. In North America, model making are starting to disappear from day-to-day lives of architects. So how do you use it? Do you use it still? And what kind of practice do you have with it? So yeah. Let's see.
Well, we used to use it more, I must say, but probably more due to time. Like for example, the refuge chercheuse project, it was 12 years ago. We would model every corner almost, and we would like also tape, since it was very small, for example, we often use the one-to-one model in order to find out if something doesn't feel too small, if it was not claustrophobic. We had 1-to-20 models to study the space, the light situation, which is quite similar to the 1-to-1 model situation. But for example, we would tape the door on the wall, and all our guests would then have to stand in front of the wall to see if they would hit their head, if it would still feel right. And there I must say we're not so excessive anymore, but we still use models because we didn't find a rest. We cannot substitute with something else. We tried with 3D models on screen, like virtual models, but you always have the lens that you cannot really feel the space. I feel handicapped by not having a real model, because I don't really trust the angle of the lens. I cannot really, the light situation is always manipulated, so...
Yeah, you see the space, but you don't understand it. I mean, it's weird, but...
It's flat, it's a 2D projection of space. So we must say we're not really experienced. We didn't really find out how to work with a 3D model properly yet. That's why we stick on... Also, what I found out, for me, model helped to develop maybe a similar way as you do. While working on a model, I can think, I can develop, and with by just having somebody producing a 3D model for you, you're not in the process, you're not involved, and you just look at the result of what somebody else does, and then you have to judge it, and that's not the same.
I think, I don't know for you, but do you feel like models is also a tool to play with the space, but yet there is no danger in a way, no one will get hurt?
Space, but also construction, how to put things together. This is something that if you turn around you can immediately see, and while doing also you find out if something works or not.
Okay, so thank you so much. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for coming as well to our place, to the Cité des Arts, to Centre culturel suisse. You have noticed everything is registered, and so also for our audience, just a little hint, we have a mediathek on our website where all past architecture talks, graphic design talks are registered, so if you're interested in what has happened already, you can have a look there, and then obviously also this one will be up in the couple of upcoming weeks. Thank you so much, and have a nice evening. Merci beaucoup.